you were born in the stars. You were created from a star system known as Pleiades, and through that, my dear friend, you discovered what love was really about, because the remarkable quality of that particular star system is that it's about a tremendous compassion, care for others, certainly healing, and all aspects of healing in terms of assisting when required, when asked, with permission only, etc. So in that relationship, you discovered, my dear friend, what love was about, and from there you simply journeyed into the celestial realm. And what we mean by this, it would be all creatures of all different types, but who are truly enlightened beings. So you really spent an enormous amount of your existence with enlightened beings and listening to their lessons and studying as an apprentice. And then they suggested to you, this is wonderful that you understand all of these concepts. Now see if you can apply them by going to planet Earth.
Yeah, so what would be the greatest way that I could experience this unlimitedness that I pray about every day?
Just enjoy it, my dear friend. You see, you can't put it in a bottle, and you can't give it a name. Ultimately, part of the plan as you grow into greater and greater love is, as you are on a quest for love, suddenly you become that, and no longer are you seeking it, but you're just the full expression of it.
Welcome to the ibringwater show, guys. I am your host, Michael Mason. It's nice to be back. You are listening to EP5, The Diary of a Human Angel. Now, this is a podcast episode that I have resisted tremendously in sitting down, formatting, organizing, recording, sharing. We all have different sensitivities, and we all have different insecurities, and we all have different things that we avoid and we resist, and we find ways to cope with. And for me, this is a very, very personal story, a very intimate story. It's a story that has many layers that we won't explore, but it has some layers that we will explore and share. And it's time. I mean, it's time for me in terms of my personal growth, my healing, my ability to continue to move forward in my life step by step, and continue to do my work in the world, and put myself out there, and allow myself to be seen, and to develop a tremendously intimate relationship with you guys. One thing too is I am very specific, very artistic, almost perfectionistic in a lot of the ways that I do things. And so, I had maybe an intention to do a podcast episode every 3 weeks during this first season from, January to through September. But I've given myself permission to just allow these episodes to happen as they're supposed to, and to allow myself the space to create. Really, these episodes aren't just me getting out there and just blabbing my mouth about stuff. And, by all means, there's a lot of people that love putting out content, and I'm not going to question whether or not it has value or not, because I think each individual person is on their own unique journey. And I think each individual listener, in terms of podcasts or any content creation or any content, people who are taking in that content, I think it's individual and unique for that person to decide what is valuable for them individually. And so, but for me, it's almost like these podcast episodes are like a work of art in many ways. The way that ultimately the clothing that I do eventually put out, it's a work of art. It's a mosaic of consciousness. It's multi-layered, and it's really here to help you and to inspire you to unlock those potentials within you, because that's, for me individually, that's been my work in the world, is to continue to try to unlock those potentials within me. And we all have areas that are challenging for us, and for me it's my monk-like nature. It's my ability to just stay within myself and in my own safe space of safety, and not push myself. And that's part of my work in the world, is to push myself out there, so that others can benefit from this internal capacity that I have to I have to for contemplation, and for my ability to create a certain presence, to be in observation of my own consciousness, my own thoughts, my own feelings, and things like that. And it's easy for us to get caught up in the world. It's easy for us to get caught up in all the things that are going on in our life. It's easy for us to be reactive. It's easy for us to because the body and the ego and the mind is all designed to help sustain us. It's designed to help us stay safe. It's designed to help keep us moving in life. And I think a lot of times, a lot of the dysfunction in society is a direct result of us moving at such a high pace and being so reactive, and being so what's the word I'm looking for? And being so competitive, and not allowing ourselves the space to really slow down and to find a way to blend this this unified nature that is truly life, and this physical concrete nature, which has almost forced us to be guarded and competitive and things like that, because so many people don't know themselves, and so many people don't operate from a high level of personal integrity, or from a heart-centered approach, and therefore their behaviors are not rooted in their spirit, but is rooted in their survival instincts. And there is tremendous corruption on this planet, but at the same time, there's a tremendously loving human spirit that is at the foundation of who we are, and in our capacity to move deeper into who we are, and to bring spirit into the physical reality. And that's what I term, heaven and earth, bridging heaven and earth. And in a lot of ways, my spiritual awakening, which did really begin in 2013 and dropped me into the ocean of consciousness. I was straddling two realities. I was overwhelmed by this Holy Spirit, this spiritual ocean of love energy that just consumed my whole being, and almost too much. It was too much for me to hold and harness. But I had been cultivating this vessel to be able to be a vessel for God's love, and so I kind of called that upon myself, and I didn't realize in opening that Pandora's box, how that would overcome me, and how that would ultimately help me realize who I am and heal and things like that. But anyway, we're gonna go ahead and walk through the Diary of a Human Angel, and I have a lot of notes, and this could be a long show, but I've recently decided, rather than making this 2 episodes, it's just going to be one long episode, so that I can get it all out there, or, what I want to talk about, and maybe some things I won't talk about, because a lot of this journey was extremely complex, extremely abstract, extremely messy, and ugly, and vulnerable, and shameful, in terms of, just dealing with all of these when you're healing your spirit, when you're bringing your unconscious to the conscious surface, when you're working through lifetimes of hurt and pain and sense of abandonment and sexual shame and all of the different things that come up as being a human being and walking the path of life and being hurt and being disappointed and feeling, all these different ways, it forces us to look at these layers of hurt, these layers of pain, these layers of shame, these layers of insecurity and stuff. And so it was really messy. And so I'm going to share some of the key points from this journey over the last, let's say 9 years. And I hope you guys enjoy it. So the real title of this episode is probably Love, Inspiration in parentheses, and Patience. Love and patience. And, I want to tell the story, so badly. I want to tell it right so badly. And this is obviously going to be just a small portion of it. And the characters in this story, I'm not going to be using names because these are real people, and this is a real story, and it's not, it's not make believe. But the thing about it is that it's just a small portion or window into my personal journey, in a sense that it's just my perspective on this journey. And my perspective is just a portion of the absolute reality. So the people in this story have their own versions and their own reality and their own experience. And so part of the reason that I've avoided telling the story is because it does involve a lot of people, and it's my intention to try to give the most balanced and the most respectful and the most and the greatest amount of wisdom that can be shared for my listeners, and so that I can make peace with this part of my life and this part of this journey and move forward. And you can see how messy it is. It's very messy, and love will always be the greatest teacher in life. And just to note that I have created a playlist on Spotify for season 1 of the ibringwater show, and it's called The Reckoning. And if there are any episodes that most closely represent the songs that are on that playlist, The Reckoning, it's from this show EP5. So I'll make sure to put a link in the bio of this episode for The Reckoning, season 1 playlist for the ibringwater show. And additionally, I have like 12 other curated playlists on my personal Spotify account that kind of allow me to kind of structure certain vibes or certain feelings or certain experiences. And so there's pretty much a little bit of everything for you guys to be able to listen to if that's something that you enjoy. Now, leading up to my awakening, I remember that there were some specific points where my mind had become, more and more silent. And then there was a specific point that I remembered starting to hear like frequency in my ears. And it was a part of this like movement from, age 22, where I decided that I was going to give my life to God. And then to the point where all of my chakras opened and I started blazing this like universal Holy Spirit through all of my being. And so I'd noticed like little by little as I was weeding through my limiting belief systems, I was opening my heart. I was learning how to be present. I was learning how to call myself out on my own bullshit. In that, I was able to simplify my mind. And as I simplified my mind, my ego became more and more quiet. It stopped talking. It stopped telling all these stories. And my spirit was able to come forward. And I believe that I was starting to tune into like this divine frequency. And that's why I could start to hear this vibration of the universe, of the structure, or the structure of life, the foundation of life being this frequency that encompasses and that surrounds and is imbued in everything. Now, during this time, I was married and to my ex-wife, I'll call her, and the thing about that relationship this was the end of this period, right? And we had been together for essentially 16 years, and we had a very functional relationship. I would say that we had a kind of a friendship, and there was a level of teamwork, and we grew up together, right? I mean, I met her at 18, and at the time she was dating or she had a boyfriend since she was really young, like 13 or 14. And they had a child together at around 15 years old. So they were extremely young. And some things happened in his life. And I believe he went to prison around 16 or juvenile, whatever, and eventually prison. But so at the time of me meeting her, I'd never really had a girlfriend before. And she had a 2-year-old daughter at the time, and so we ended up, talking to her in class and asked her, if she'd want to meet on the weekend or watch a movie or do something, and so anyway, one thing led to another, and we ended up dating, and so, but the thing about that dynamic is that I could, we were both extremely young, and I could tell that she always felt guilty for leaving her boyfriend at the time, and it just really weighed on her, and it never really, it was almost like by the time we got married at 22, like I had to like convince her to marry me in a way. Like it was like she kind of didn't want to. She was really hesitant. So in many ways, I never felt like she was my girl. I always felt like, like we were practicing. It was like a practice relationship in terms of, a functional relationship in terms of, when you're in a place where you do have codependent patterns, relationships allow us the opportunity to depend on each other and to and to create a certain sense of security and growth in ways. And so in a lot of ways, I never felt like she was my girl. And I always felt like she had this like unresolved dynamic with her ex-boyfriend. And, during that period of time, we got married at 22 and had our first child together at 23, and then our second at 25. And so, and during that period of time when we were raising her daughter and then our 2 kids, and, and then I was obviously on my own mystical journey that I didn't really share with too many people, but I mean, obviously she knew I was different. She always knew I was different. And it was interesting. I think there were periods of time in that relationship where there were some things that, didn't feel good to me. I think there was maybe a little bit more of a competitive nature on her end towards me. And some of the things that were unresolved in her, and some of the things in terms of my sensitivity or crying during movies and being made fun of, and then even later, really fast forwarding to the end of the relationship. And, I had never really been on social media. I had never really been out in the world. It wasn't until my early 30s where I started to like slowly but surely start to give back to myself, meaning that I started, playing softball, or, about a year or two before this awakening, I decided, okay, I'm going to start, now that we've, all those years we worked to get her into a position where she could be a registered nurse, and we both had, two incomes coming in now, and we had a really nice house next to the park. We had built ourselves from really chaotic and, challenging childhoods or whatever, in terms of the lack of structure and discipline and things like that in our personal lives when we were kids. And, we really built a nice life for ourselves in terms of the American dream, in terms of what people would categorize as, living like the American dream, or having all the things that you should be happy with or whatever. And, but so anyway, my point was, I started giving back to myself, and, I even started I tried to get a Facebook, and a friend requested my wife on her Facebook, and she denied me. And then I tried again, and she denied me again. And so there was like this underlining energy underneath of our relationship where it was like, really sad and really disappointing. And part of that is that dynamic of the unresolved feminine energy and that insecure, unresolved masculine energy at play, right? And, and years later, after the marriage broke up, and many years of us taking our individual paths and journeys and healing and things like that, I mean, obviously, she's apologized to me for some of the things the ways that she was back then. And again, it's not, this whole program and all of the characters in this program is not to, is not to be judgmental towards any of the characters. It's to tell a story, and hopefully that story touches people, and hopefully that story people resonate with, and they could apply it in their own lives, and find ways to heal themselves and to heal on their journey, and to create a more fulfilling life and more fulfilling relationships. So that's really the intention. So one thing that I can remember on the journey in terms of that portion of my life is, whenever like some type of a holiday or occasion or whatever comes up, and I have to, write a card for my wife or whatever. And I have, and I always did nice cards, and I always gave nice notes to my family, my loved ones. I think people appreciate that about me in terms of my thoughtfulness or my emotionality or my ability to write and express my feelings, right? And but I always felt like I had to kind of force the story, the narrative, or the things that I wrote to my ex-wife. And it was like I would think sometimes towards the later end of the relationship, like I always felt like your romantic relationship, it should be with somebody that you feel like you want to be with forever. Like even after you die, you want to be in the heavens, like bouncing on clouds with each other, and just, you just really can't get enough. But I never really felt that way with her. So it always felt kind of forced. And so I just thought like, I feel like the love that you should have, it should be like a forever kind of love, and for her it felt like more of like a learning dynamic rather than like true love. And the thing was too, in this portion of my life, I had been so good at being a bridge for others, and I think part of that was like giving my life to God and opening myself to this tremendous frequency of compassion and understanding, which love is truly understanding. But being so good at being a nurturer and being so good at being a harmonious spirit that I am, I gave and gave and gave, and it wasn't reciprocated necessarily in that portion of my life. And so my message to you guys is that real love is not about being selfless. I mean, selflessness is a portion of the expression of love. It's the wisdom behind it. It's the understanding that there is sacrifice sometimes in life. And when you're trying to be virtuous, you have to understand that virtuousness is not an intellectual space. It's not a black and white world. And only, God lives in the white world, and the black world you have to ignore. You have to understand that part of love is learning to love yourself, is learning to forgive yourself, is learning to follow your heart and follow your intuition. And sometimes doing that, being true to yourself, means that you have to face your own self-judgment. You have to face the judgment and the disappointment of others. So, moving from a space of like intellectual spirituality or intellectual idealism into actualizing yourself, into having a deep and profound and authentic relationship with love, it's about trusting how you feel. It's about giving to yourself and recognizing that love is a give and a take, and it's not about keeping score. Now, one of the practices that I began in leading up to my awakening was this intentional practice that I had created. And at the time, I was studying a lot of Jane Roberts' work and the Seth books, and probably 3 or 4 years, because I had read probably, 6, 7, 8 of them. And I was always a slow reader, because I always I would always seek things that had the least amount of distortion. I've shared that before, so that I could consume truth, right? And because my vibration and my self-awareness is really rather high, I am able to perceive distortion or bullshit or just excessive busyness. And so my goal has always been to simplify my consciousness, and therefore you'll find that not only do I read slow, but I only read certain things, because I end up putting down a lot of books if I don't feel like it has value to me personally on my journey. And so while reading this, Seth material, Jane Roberts books, I had come across some different ideas. And so I decided I was going to set an intentional practice probably 2 or 3 years before this full-blown awakening. And so I would start it off in the morning. I was a maintenance manager at a food manufacturing facility that made hamburger buns for McDonald's. And fortunately, I think I got to start a little later. I was able to, take my kids to school. And because all 3 of them were going to, for a period of time, I think they all went to the elementary school because it was K through 8. And then I'd stop at Starbucks a lot of times, and whatever book I was reading, I'd read a couple pages, just sit there and just chill with myself, just be with myself, and just to learn how to slow down the noise of the world, and to really get centered in who I am and what I want and how I feel. And so just reading a couple pages of a book, it just it set the tone for my day. And then on my way to work, I would, I'd start this intentional practice, and it was I am free from all illusions of separation. I am guided, inspired, and blessed. I have the blueprint for all of consciousness within me, the DNA of all beingness. I'm continuously developing my psychic, intuitive, and sense perceptions moment to moment for the benefit of my life and the life of all creation. I'm drawing upon the unlimited and infinite potentials of my soul self, or higher self, onto this personality, Michael Mason, for the creation and benefit of the most magnificent and abundant life available. I'm drawing upon a greater understanding of the structures and patterns of the physical and spiritual dimensions of reality. That was kind of how it started. That's all I can remember. But then I would go into different layers and talking about specific goals and different things in my life. and stuff like that. And I really believe that practice that I really created for the last 2 or 3 years was really opening me up and like preparing me for like the kingdom of God or the Holy Spirit or all this like it was preparing my vessel to be this like full, just to be a conduit for universal awareness and love and all that kind of stuff. Now I was opening up Pandora's box, and and so yeah, it's really interesting. So the next character in the story is my flame. I'll call her my flame. And so I was working in this manufacturing facility, this bakery, from 1999 until leaving in 2014 February or so. And I was in the office with the production superintendent, I believe, at the time, and this was probably March or April 2013. And he's also a Leo like myself, and so we decided to sometimes stop by, and we'd have some, pretty fun conversations and stuff like that. And I was the assistant chief engineer, is basically a maintenance manager, and so I had a little bit of freedom, and had been doing that for that previous 8 years. So I was anyway. So this girl came in, and I think she was asking the superintendent about a check or her schedule or something like that, and I never really looked at her face, but I could feel her energy and her presence, and I thought to myself, this is going to be the end of me. And yeah, interestingly enough, because we had just, with the bakery, we had just did an expansion. We had built a second line in the plant, and we hadn't run it for a while, but we had finally got the business to start running the English Muffins. We already ran the buns, the hamburger buns for McDonald's, and so we were doing the English Muffin line, and so we had hired a bunch of people, and this and my flame turned out to be one of those hires, and that was the energy that I had felt in the office that morning. So I remember seeing my flame again. I remember walking into this back room. It was called the Muffin Wrap, and I looked and I saw her, and she looked back and she saw me, and we just connected, and you could tell there was some type of a connection there. And so I knew I needed to talk to this girl. And so I saw her later on that day or something. And I said, hi, how do you like it here or something? And she said, I like it. And I said, where are you from? And she said, Dole. And I told her to, have a nice weekend or whatever. And then I probably just thought about her all weekend, and couldn't stop thinking about her. As soon as I experienced the presence of my flame, it was changing me. It was awakening me. I was experiencing something that I had never experienced before in my life, and it almost felt like, she could see me. Like she was the first person that ever really saw me. And later on, I noticed when I would speak to her, I could feel the energy inside of her, inside of me when I spoke to her, and how it affected her. So I'd spent all, weekend thinking about this girl, and I think I went out to do like a stormwater inspection, and she was out there throwing out the trash, and So I went up to her and I said, that you look familiar. Are you from Stockton? And she says, yes. And she said, you look familiar too. I thought you were a boyfriend of my sister's, an old boyfriend of my sister's, but you're not. And I said, no, I'm not. I've been in a relationship for a long time, since I was 18 years old. And she says, oh, you're married? And I say, yeah. And she said, white or Mexican? And I said, Mexican. And, she's Mexican as well. And so I had this overwhelming feeling of wanting to tell her how beautiful she was. But obviously I couldn't tell her that. So I said, yeah, I really have a thing for dark-haired women. And she just kind of looked at me and stared. And then I don't know how we got into it, and I showed her my picture of my kids, Mikey and Rain. And so, after I showed her a picture of my kids and stuff, and then she started, rolling the garbage can back, and I asked her, I said, do you have kids? And she said, and she had the most bubbly and just like beautiful energy, and she was kind of almost like bouncing, like skipping, and she said, no, I'm not going to have kids till I'm 30. And I just like thought to myself, like, yes, I have time. And I just felt like she was like, this girl was my girl, like for the first time, like I found my girl. And yeah, so the thing is, like throughout my life, I felt like I've always had these like dreams where I've had this like woman who was always watching me, and she was like in the dark, and like, I couldn't really reach her or whatever, but I felt like my flame was this woman from my dreams who had always kind of been with me, but kind of on the outside. And the thing was that, I had been focused on, putting on the mind of Christ for that 12 years before she came. And, I had no fucking idea that, that this type of like connection was available, because I was so focused on giving my life to humanity that I had no like perception that romantic love like that could exist. And she became essentially the focal point for my Christ-like love. And it was so much, because it brought up so much passion. It brought up so inevitably, ultimately, so much pain and so much insecurity and so much vulnerability. And I think that the meeting between her and I was designed in such a way that, because I felt so seen and so safe around her, that's what sped up my awakening, because my root chakra, my base, was always really closed off because of like this not feeling safe in my body, not really feeling fully safe human, just because I'm like an ET soul, and I've had, and the vibration on this planet and the lack of self-awareness on this planet is pretty jarring. And when you have kind of a higher vibration or more self-awareness, or you're more loving, and you're having to deal with the lower vibrations on this planet, and all the fear and all the anger and all the judgment and all these things, it's easy to be extremely guarded. But for the first time with her, I felt truly seen and truly safe. And I think that kind of like expedited my awakening, like it was planned by the universe for me to meet her at that point, so that she could help be the catalyst for me to like fully step into my true identity, so that I could ultimately uncover all of the different parts and pieces and elements of what my soul plan was prior to this incarnation. So I saw her again, like maybe the next week or something. I mean, I can't stop thinking about this flame, this girl, and saw her at the Bagger, and we, hung out for a little bit, and and she said that, you know, I was telling her about, I had a tattoo appointment or something coming up, and I hadn't had any tattoos. I had one tattoo, which was like a homemade tattoo that I had gotten when I was like 13, and then I had it tried to get it removed because it was so ugly, and I was so shameful or so insecure about it, and it just said Lone Wolf. And so I told her I'm going to get this like old scar covered within my first tattoo. And she's like, oh, what did it say? And I was like, oh, no. And so, because I was so insecure at the time, like I didn't want to tell her that, you know. But she was like, you know, your energy distracts me, you know, from work. Obviously, she's working. I'm standing there just, you know, talking to her. And I said that I like to distract you. And then, you know, I went on to say, like, you know, I'm the kind of person, like, I would never cheat on my wife. Like, if I met somebody or whatever, and I would just tell my wife and I would move on. And she's like, hold up, you're going way too deep. And I'm like, yeah. Yeah, that's just who I am, though, you know. And obviously, I went about my way because there's a lot of insecurity there. I mean, just the whole reality of, you know, being at the workplace, and, you know, me being a manager, me being 34, and this girl, you know, being 21, and me being married, and just having these like very intense feelings. It was like I was very afraid and extremely insecure and cautious and stuff, and I was like kind of freaking out in terms of like putting myself in such a vulnerable position. But I couldn't not be connected to this girl, you know. You know, so I was starting to come to kind of a realization, like, that there was a possibility that my life as I knew it, had known it for the last 18 years of my life, my complete identity from 18 to 34 was being a husband and father, obviously a manager, but more so just being a husband and father was always my greatest passion. And so I was experiencing this kind of melancholy, you know, in terms of like, you know, being at parties with the kids or family or whatever, and just getting the sense like, you know, this was all about to end. This chapter of my life was about to end, and I would never have it back. And you know, going on an annual Monterey trip on my with my wife, ex-wife now. You know, there was just so much sadness behind this period of time, from March when I met my flame to June 29th when I left my marriage and the only life that I had known since I was 18. And yeah, it was very confusing. Now, my mama, God rest her soul, I remember one day she came to my house and we were sitting down at the table, and she said, Mike, you know, I've never seen you more happy in your life. She goes, I can literally see lights shooting out of the top of your head. And, you know, I realized at the time that I was having an awakening, and that was a spiritual energy, and she was able to perceive that frequency, you know, and you know, that was unique. I remember one night on a Saturday after watching a UFC pay-per-view or something, that I got called into the bakery, and I never wanted to get called into the bakery. I never wanted to have to take a call to be the person who was responsible to try to figure out some of these complex processes and solutions. It was being a mystical kind of abstract being. Part of my life work in this life has been able to really ground that with my Virgo and my North Node. So it, you know, makes sense, you know, learning to grow safe in the physical world by working in maintenance the last 20 years. But, you know, I didn't mind actually taking that call because I knew that I might see my flame. And sure enough, you know, she was working in that wrapping area where we had been having a problem with this bagger. And so I ended up sticking around there for a couple hours. And I was really like not right next to her. You know, we were working side by side for a couple hours. And I have to say, like, even today, you know, like that 2 hours of my life was literally like heaven on earth, being that close to her and her energy. And, we were still individual egos, and this was before all of our energy kind of opened. And then I almost feel like we became like one in spirit. And obviously, 9 years later, we've, individualized our consciousness back into our individual egos, but obviously have experienced this kind of God awakening. We are like individualized conscious streams of consciousness again. But that period of my life was that 2 hours was some of the most beautiful experiences that I had ever had. And when I first came in, and she was like, fix it, Mike. Can you fix it, Mike, or fix it, Mike? And I was just like, why are you in a hurry to get out? And you got a hot date that night, and so that's just that insecure masculine energy, like. So she was being, silly, and I was being like almost possessive. And I think that's just part of that masculine, feminine, unhealed dynamic. I can look back at that now and see where I was in my energy then. And, yeah. So around this period of time was the time that and it was probably within 3 weeks, when, after I met my flame, that I had actually told my wife how I felt. And the story I just told you about the UFC fights, that was probably a month after I had told my wife how I felt, and she pretty much, she kicked me out of the house right away. That was her defense, and I get that. She was hurt, and so I went and lived with my sister for a few days, and then I came back, and we were really trying to work things out, as best we could, because I obviously was completely confused, and I know she was hurt and insecure, and I tried to convince myself that these feelings weren't real for the flame, and these feelings weren't real, that I needed to move on with my life and to make a big change, which was scary as fuck. So I met my flame again after a weekend. I think it was the weekend or the weekend after I told my wife, and she asked me how my weekend was, and I just kind of went silent, and I couldn't tell her that the experiences that I had had with my wife in terms of opening up to like deeper emotional streams, like the result of sharing with her the potential of me leaving, like it opened up this like intimacy and sexuality, and it was almost like closing a chapter of this relationship with her that we had for 16 years that was really kind of dry, and being able to experience a deeper level of love and intimacy for those last few months during our relationship. And it opened up something in me as a man in terms of feeling more connected and confident in who I am. And it was just amazing that by opening to those levels of vulnerability and sharing the truth of who I was and how I really felt with her, that deeper levels of intimacy and connection was available. But, nevertheless, I still didn't know what to do. So as time drew on, it was getting more and more clear to me that I did need to move on. I secretly went to an old apartment complex that I had lived at when I was a teenager, and I checked to see how much the rent was going to cost. And I was just kind of preparing myself for what I might have to inevitably do. And, I just struggled back and forth with this, for many, many, many weeks. And I remember leaving work one day, and my flame was just pulling up. She was working swing shift. I was working mornings, and I just went up to her and just said, hey, I don't remember specifically, but that I can't stop thinking about you. And she's like, look, I'm just trying to, pass my probation here. And, so we left it at that for a while. But yet, time went on, and then eventually one day when I was off work, I was with my ex-wife, and she, we had been trying to kind of work this stuff out. I think, we did end up going on that Monterey trip, but it was very sad because you could always kind of tell that it was an ending of things. And she asked me if I wanted to be with her, and that's when I told her, like, no. And like, it was like during this, this last week or two of my marriage, and it really dropped us into a very, very sad, very vulnerable, very just profound space. And so it was around that time where, I think maybe there's the next morning, I told my wife at the time, I had to go in and get some training done, which I did, but I wanted the possibility to see my flame. And so I got in there. And it was around 5 or 5:05, and I saw her car was still parked, and so I was thinking, like, yeah, I'm early. And so I gathered my stuff, and I was heading into the entrance, and I looked in her car, and I realized that she was sitting inside of her car. And I walked over to her window, and I saw her digging through her glove compartment, and she was getting ready to leave. Maybe she was just warming up her car. And I knocked on her window, and she started to roll it down, and she was looking at me with these big, beautiful brown eyes, and she stared. And I told her that I had realized that she was my soulmate. And she said, "I'm not your soulmate." She said, "Your wife is your soulmate." And I said, "No, you are." I said, "You have to understand that some relationships are meant to last for 16 years, and some are meant to last for a lifetime." And I said, "You've been so quiet all this time." I go, so quiet all this time, saying nothing. And she just looked at me, and for a second she delayed, and then she looked at me and she said, I want to know how you see me through your eyes." And I just looked at her, and then I walked away and went into work. So at home, it was really sad. My ex-wife was really breaking down, and I think she was going to work, but I don't think she was sleeping much or whatever. And it was just freaking. It was scary. It was freaking me out, and it reminded me of my childhood. Now, I hadn't really talked about this, but when I was a kid, my mom, she'd been dealing with manic depression and like bipolar stuff like that all of her life, ever since I was in her belly. And so I've always like had this like tremendous understanding for this like feminine wounding and the pain that the feminine holds. And so my mom had, she was, dating a guy at the time, and she was probably in her early 30s, and she was working at a local hospital, and she was a LVN, working in like the surgery department. She was like giving the tools to the doctors. And so she had got into a relationship or had a connection with it'd been a few years on and off with this RN who worked there, and he was married. But they, I guess they had a relationship or a fling or something on the side, and she wanted to be with him, she wanted to marry him, and all that. And they just had a lot of struggles, and she went in. This was probably the first time that she went into the first or second. And she had a few, almost like every 5 or 7 years, she would go into this really dark place, and she would be gone for a while. And so in this particular time, it was probably a week or two, and she was gone. And she didn't want to send us to school. We lived at this nice little house by Oak Park, actually, and the house was owned by her boyfriend, the one that she was having a hard time with, the one who was married, or I don't know if he was married at that point, but I think he was probably. So we weren't going to school for a few weeks, and I don't, or maybe that was a different one. But what happened was, I can remember, I think that was the second one where we didn't go to school for a few weeks. For this first one, she got us into her car, her little Mazda 323 that she had, and she was driving around Stockton for I don't know, an hour or two. And we just kept asking her. I kept asking her, Mom, where are we going? And all she would say is patience, 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 patience. That's all she would say. And then, so we're going down California Street, and the corner there, I think it's Harding. And she got us out of the car. She grabbed my hand and my sister's hand. I was probably 7. Sister was probably 9. And she walked us across the intersection, just holding our hands. And then to the left, she walked us into a parking lot. And she proceeded to knock my sister down and choke her right in front of me. I thought I had memories of my sister either having blood coming out of her nose or ears or something, but I know that she choked her for a while. I know that people came out of the building and got my mom off of my sister. And just the sense of helplessness that I felt as a little boy. That helplessness is what I felt that week, that before I left my marriage, and the pain that my ex-wife was going through. And, not to say, that I tell this story, but we've all had people in our lives or in our families, or we've known people who struggle with mental health, and we all struggle with mental health. And my mom, such a beautiful spirit who passed away maybe 5 years ago. It was her birthday yesterday. Happy birthday, Mom. She was such a wonderful woman, such a passionate, loving woman who loved her family, loves her family, and watches over her family now. But at that time, I can remember the fear of myself having to deal with my own identity in the world as a father. Having to leave my family and leave my babies, and not knowing if my ex-wife was going to be okay mentally, emotionally, to be able to handle things in her life. But knowing that deep down I had to love myself enough to follow my path, follow my intuition. And to face my cross and face my own self-judgment of what was right and what was wrong, and what I needed to do to love myself enough and to follow a path to creating a life I truly love, and potentially experiencing a relationship that was profoundly connected and intimate and loving and all that. And I remember times just sitting with her and reading a book called there's a book called Love Without Conditions by Paul Ferrini, I believe. We'd read some pages out of that together, but it was very, very profoundly sad and vulnerable and scary last week before I left my life, June 29th, 2013. So it was during that week, probably Thursday or Friday, I went in the evening time. And I had some more training to get done with my guys, and walked by my flame, and she said, "Hey, Mike, why are you here?" And I told her, that I had to get some of the training done because I was getting ready the next month to take 3 weeks of vacation because I had a life coach training class that I was going to take. And things were really bad at home at the time, obviously. And so I had this note that I'd been writing that I wanted to give to my flame. It was either that night or the next night. I walked up to where she was working, and I tried to give her this note. She wouldn't accept it. Yeah, and on this note it started out with just a few anecdotes of just things that are going on, how I'm feeling, that my mom was saw light shooting out my body, and just how I felt about her, and I titled it "You and Me" because I knew if it ever got lost, then nobody would actually know who wrote it. So because I was so scared of what I was doing, I was judging myself and everything. And like I said, things were really bad at home, and I think it was on that Saturday morning that I planned to go into work early to give the letter to my flame and just try again. I couldn't wait any longer, and I had to go get gas or something like that. And anyway, I arrived there just at 5:00, and to my surprise, that amazement and joy. As I pulled in the parking lot, my flame was out there at the corner of the dock, and she was taking out the trash that had accumulated from her work shift. So she was probably the last thing she was getting ready to do before she, got ready to go home. And I was so excited, and I pulled a quick left into the first available parking spot, and without turning my lights off or anything in my car, at this point, I was no longer afraid of who was around and who might see me. And I removed this little note that I had squared up in the pocket of my wallet. And I ran out of the car. I jumped out of the car, and I ran up to the dumpster area where she was, and she just looked at me. And I said, "I finally got you cornered, with nobody around." And I said, I've had this spiritual awakening, and now I realize that why I can't leave you alone. It's because I've noticed in you the same unconditional love in your heart is the love that I have in mine. I said, you are my inspiration, and you are my heaven on earth, and you deserve my love, and I deserve yours. This isn't the kind of love. This is the kind of love you won't find for 100 or even 1,000 lifetimes. I said, you have my heart and soul. And I gave her the note, and she took it. And I said, please keep it safe. You have my heart and soul. Please keep it safe. And I turned around and went back to my car and turned off my lights, grabbed my lunch or whatever, and went into work. So this was a time period that got when things got pretty crazy, pretty fast. And it was that same day, that same Saturday or whatever, I was at work, and my daughter Raina or something, had called me and said that I had to come home. Something was going on with Mom. I think her sister was there at the time, and she was in a really bad place. And I think my brother-in-law took me across the park across the street to Groupie Park, and was just trying to understand why I was doing this and why I felt this way. And I couldn't explain to him or really explain to anybody that I was following my heart and doing what I felt deep down that I had to do. And I think I ended up leaving that day, and was heartbroken, and going to stay with my sister. And I ended up staying with my sister for probably, 3 or 4 weeks. I think at that point, my mom was able to borrow me like $3,000, which was just enough to get an apartment and a few, shitty. A few shitty pieces of furniture, the cheapest stuff out there, some basic box mattresses and a really cheapy couch and stuff and TV. But so yeah, I started staying at my sister's, and things from there just got more and more crazy in terms of the synchronicity and really moving into this spiritual energy. This was, July 2013. And and I was just becoming, fully illuminated. I started experiencing some very unique things. I remember also that my flame had actually went to school with my ex-wife's niece, who her and her brother had lived with us for on and off for 5, 6, 7, 8 years. Over the years, we had helped raise them, and so somehow, some way, they had figured out that who my flame was. So I had messaged her and told her, hey, that that I always had her back, and that that they kind of figured out who she was. And so things just got really, really weird and really, really messy. Not only did I feel like her and I were going through something very spiritual, but she had basically shut down from even talking to me, and she had felt that I had put her in a position in terms of doing something, in terms of leaving my family or leaving my wife, and without her consent, without her permission, without her acknowledgement that it was consensual or mutual. And so even though on an emotional, spiritual level, I know that her and I had a connection, on a surface level, on an identity level, on an ego level, there wasn't an alignment. And so I believe that my ex-wife had contacted her, and they had a few conversations, and the flame had agreed that she was young, and she was just figuring out who she was in the world, and that she had no interest in being in a relationship with me. And there was a sense of anger, and the wife, the flame, the family, everybody was judging me for doing what I had done. And little did they know that I was just being dropped into the ocean of God consciousness, and that I was completely, illuminated at first, and within a few months became completely overwhelmed by this vibration. And they didn't understand really the individual path that I had been on leading up to this point. And so they were both at different places in their journey, and so my perspective was unique to my own journey. And yeah, things got weird during the period of time when I went to do the life coach training for 3 weeks in the Bay Area. I was having visions, and I did like a full life review over a period of days, just streaming through my head, almost like a download. And I remember one night in this new apartment that I had got, hearing a cat just like meowing the most gnarly meow, the most deep and the most like wild meow you have ever heard. And it woke me out of my sleep. And then I went back to bed, and it kept doing it. I looked out the window and I saw this cat, and I fucking opened the door, and this cat was just standing there staring at me, and it was looking at me. I took a picture of its eyes. I don't know. I think I had it on my old Facebook account or something. But I felt this impression, and it said, "You need to write a book." And I was having these strange shamanic experiences at this point, because I was in an altered state of consciousness, and so I had to write a book. That was kind of the first clue. And I remember, driving to this life coach training and going through like the Fairfield area, and there's all these like sunflowers and different things on the side of the road, and taking pictures and sending like DM messages to my flame at the time, who I think at this point had blocked me from my primary Facebook account, but I was using somebody else's fake account, and she allowed that to go through. And later she said that she didn't receive those messages. But the interesting thing about me and her is, I'll just say this, simply put, that over the last 9 years that we have had a unique way of remaining in subtle contact with each other on our journey, not just our connection spiritually, but physically through social channels. There has been a subtle way through all of the hurt, all of the pain, all of the judgment, all of the disappointment, all of the attachment, which in a lot of ways, when this energy came to the surface, there was this unique and profound realization where, like, we were one consciousness in many ways. We were connected on a higher plane, and we were communicating psychically. And so even though our identities, personalities weren't in alignment on a physical level, on a spiritual level, we were in unison in a lot of ways. And so in many ways, the title of my autobiography, which will be Love, Inspiration, and Patience, but many ways, I was love and she has been patience in this story, in a sense that, there's a unique realization that we had to take our own paths in this life in order to heal our spirits and in order to face a lot of shit. And, I had never been on social media, and I had never heard of the concept of twin flames. But when my energy started opening up, and I did get on Facebook that summer of 2013 and started talking and, started putting myself out there, coming across other people. And so I became aware of this concept of the twin flame thing. And I know that it has a tremendous amount of distortion in its field, because there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot of romanticism. There are a lot of people in the spiritual community that like to romanticize things, or there are people in the spiritual community that use their spirituality as their primary mode or sense of identity. And that's part of the reason that I've learned over the years, as part of who I am, that being a man who doesn't seek limitation, I've also learned that my spirituality is a direct expression of my deeper self, and it's not something that I attach to as a sense of identity. And there are a lot of people in the spiritual community that make it kind of almost woo-woo. They make it kind of like superficial, because it is what they attach to in order to facilitate a certain sense of value. And that's how the human identity works, is it works by utilizing its intellect as a vehicle for identity. And part of learning to grow up mentally and emotionally and spiritually is learning how to become the observer and not utilizing the physical world and our intellectual reality as a place to hide in. And part of waking up spiritually is recognizing when you are dropped into a place of the ocean of consciousness, like I'm talking about, is your identity kind of, there's nothing to hold on to anymore. And that's what I was experiencing, is my ego went completely silent during this period and basically fell away. And the only thing that remained, there was nothing to hold on to. This frequency of the higher self, this frequency of the non-physical self, this frequency of the inner self, this frequency of the Holy Spirit consumed my whole consciousness. And what I felt in my presence was just God. I was presence itself. I was God itself, and I was experiencing all of these, the symbolism of the God mind in everything that I saw. And I didn't experience time, because time is a product of the local identity, the ego, the grounded ego identity, the mind. And when you are opening yourself up to your universal or your deeper self or your God mind, at least while you're trying to ground that energy, it's an altered state of consciousness. People talk about experiencing altered states of consciousness through like mushrooms or psychedelics and things like that. But I was experiencing an altered state of consciousness as a result of my commitment or my desire to experience unity with God. And that fucked me up like you could never imagine. So, when this all started, I had no idea that I was going to be dropped that way into the ocean of consciousness. I thought, okay, well, in 6 months, maybe me and the flame will get together and whatever. Like, that's not what happened. And it took me so many years to ground this consciousness. I remember when, in the beginning, just like telling myself, you got to ground this bitch, because it was just so fucking overwhelming. It was at that point, when I received that information, like, you need to write a book, the first one from the cat. Like, I started taking notes in my iPhone, and at the time I was trying to do a lot of things. I got a lawyer. I think it was recommended from a friend of mine, and I remember going in to see this lawyer, and I was in this Holy Spirit and illuminated energy, and I looked at this guy, and I just saw God in his eyes, and he's fucking awake, and he looked at me and he says, "Yeah, you're a man of God, aren't you?" And I said, "Yeah." And I knew, like, I had been awakened to this God energy, and I was looking at this lawyer, and I could feel his soul, because he had awakened at some point in his life too. And I was just taken back by that, and he helped me with the whole divorce proceedings, and I remember going to the courthouse. I remember just being so overwhelmed, and my ex-wife being so distraught and angry. She was really angry at me for quite a long time, and I remember sending a message to my flame at the time, and just telling her, like, we were like these innocent children, her and I, children of God, and I was in such a really unique and vulnerable state. My heart was really, really pure. And I felt like people didn't really understand where I was coming from. And I remember even going to one of my tattoo appointments, probably my second one at this point, or third. And I got this tattoo on my left arm, and it said, "The kingdom of God is within you." And that was, my life's work. And I remember being at the stoplight on my way to this getting this tattoo from a local shop, Canvas Tattoo, Melissa Santos, and just having this like vision in my third eye, and then just like, and receiving this message, like, that I was essentially like, here to kind of represent kind of that second coming of Christ energy, whether that energy specifically, or that the identity of the second coming of Christ. And it like absolutely like freaked me out, and I was like, fuck no way, this is like crazy, like I can't tell anybody that, like, that sounds so righteous, right? It sounds so whatever. And I went to get that tattoo, and she tattooed it on the front, and then I had an idea we would tattoo kind of on the inside of my arm, as if the kingdom of God within you is burning through. So it's tattooed like on the inside of my arm too, like going through my body, and God is spelled G-O-D, capitalized with these little apostrophes, because I'd, come across this concept. I don't know whose writing it was, but God as the grand organizing designer of creation. And so not just God, but God, the grand organizing designer, is within you. And And it was like a rebirthing experience. It was, intense, and my energy was really intense during that session. And when I came back to my sister's house, because I hadn't moved to that apartment yet, I told my sister, like, this intense experience, this kind of vision I had, and she literally saw light shooting out of my hands at that time, and I was completely illuminated in the Holy Spirit. So like during this period of time, I remember like waking up in the middle of the night and like moving through like portals of like timelines or some really strange abstract shit, because this energy was just blazing through my whole body, like profoundly. I could feel the fear like moving through my feet. Like I was like profoundly afraid. It was like the energy of God was moving through my vehicle, but my vehicle was so afraid, like I wasn't prepared to harness it. I was fucking freaked out. I remember just looking in the mirror, and all I could see in my eyes was just God. And it just absolutely just was so frightening. It was, when people talk about the whole idea of God, like fear of God, you're not afraid of God. We're afraid of realizing that we are God. You know what I mean? There's nothing to be afraid of in terms of God. God is love, is pure, profound, unadulterated love. This love is sexual, it's creative, it's feminine, and it's the birthplace of all consciousness. The reason that people have created this whole idea around fear of God is because they've created a God in the image of man's limited and judgmental, fear-based ego, because that's all they know. They can only know a God as close in direct reflection to how they know themselves, and so therefore they've created a God in the image of their own ego and their own identity. But God is everything. God is grace. God is love. God is chaos. God is destruction. God is just this movement of energy that is so powerful and profound that it wanted to know itself in all ways possible. And I believe that's the mythology or whatever. I think I got that from Alan Watts or something, and may have been around that grand organizing designer idea, but that God wanted to know itself in all ways possible. And so, it created this physical universe so that it could experience itself as a playground for consciousness, for conscious evolution. And so it slowed down its vibration and created all these physical systems that are at different vibration rates, so that we could, experience physicality, so that we could slow down our consciousness, and so that we could, grow in our creatorhood. And so that's kind of their reality. And I remember one night going into work, and that separation consciousness, that separation had already begun between me and the flame, and just looking at each other, and the anger and the fear of this awakening process, like we didn't talk anymore. And I remember being in this back room trying to fix this drive. It's a drive that it's a frequency drive, it's called, that controls a motor, and having a problem with it, and just sitting there in this altered state, this overwhelmed state of consciousness. And then I started kind of receiving these idea patterns that I was here to write a book and give it to humanity. And I was going to write a book in such a unique way that had never been written before. And I was provided the structure for this autobiography. And I knew at that moment that I was talking to extraterrestrials. Like ETs were literally in my field, in my head. I had opened up my clairaudient ability, because I remember coming across a book called Talking to Extraterrestrials by Linda something. I think that was the name. Anyway, it was some books that I had purchased years back. I never really read them all the way through, but I realized at that moment that I was like channeling, like they were like communicating with me and reminding me. I was like awakening to my like life mission here on Earth. And again, it was just completely overwhelming, and it just freaked me out. And there was, another day, like I came into work and I was working with my boss. We had like a project or something. And I was so I was becoming so overwhelmed by the Holy Spirit. Like even as a manager, I could sit there in my office and just nod off for hours because I really couldn't focus anymore. When your whole ability to function when you're in an altered state of consciousness or to focus on physical reality you're drowning. You cannot get back to earth, and you can't just focus your mind because it's so overwhelmed. And I remember walking across my flame that morning when I came in for this project we were doing in the bakery, and I said, "Hey, stranger," and she just looked at me, and being in proximity to her energy field and my energy field when we were already opened up that way, it intensified my process 200 or 300 or 400 times, and I literally couldn't function. I went back to the shop and sat down and just nodded off in the table, and then I just told my boss I have to leave, and so I left like 9 or 10 o'clock, and I think I went down the road and got some breakfast at this little breakfast joint, and then I went home. But like we were experiencing something so profound and so overwhelming. And I remember messaging her, begging her for mercy to talk to me or to allow us to have this connection. So it was around that time that I did come across, the concept of twin flames, and I started seeing a lot of patternization, symbolization, like just being in an altered state, connecting with the sun, connecting with the moon, looking at the sky, seeing the colors, and just starting to understand the symbolism for how physical reality actually works. I mean, we get really caught up in our intellectual process and things like that, but we don't realize that behind the background of all of life is just like this profound symbolism that's everywhere, right? And realizing that that her and I, our initials were MM, and those were a mirror, and that the letters in our names were, I had 7 symbols in my first name and 5 in my last, and she had 5 in her first name and 7 in her last, and it was like this profound mirroring effect. And I think I realized, and even at this point, in terms of the whole concept of the twin flame thing, like, I'm not specifically sure that there's like 2 halves of God and that we're the complete mirrors, but there is something to it. I think that there is some type of a profound, like, we do share part of a higher self. Whether that's ultimately in pairs, I don't necessarily think so, but it is quite possible. I do know that if you look at the physical features of her face and mine together, you put us side by side, there's a lot of similarities in our facial features as well. And I think part of that polarization and that profound emotional connection, this just natural intimacy that we have, it's like we truly understand each other. We can speak each other's language without speaking. I told her one time at work, like, that her soul energy, that she has a beautiful soul, and that her soul energy sings to me. Her soul sings to my soul, and I've come across another set of supposed like twin flames, and they too, like, their whole body structure and their facial structures like were very similar and stuff, and you could almost tell like they're from a different star system than, say, me and my flame. And that's what I realized when I was reflecting on the Dr. Peoples reading that I had 3 or 4 or 5 years prior about me being from the Palladian star system. And I thought, well, if I'm this ET soul from the Palladian star system, which made sense now because of what I'm going through, what I was going through, I realized that I was a human angel. I realized that normal people don't hold this type of vibration, don't experience this profound, overwhelming connection God, to love, to becoming fully inspired and being overwhelmed by this energy. People don't normally experience what I was experiencing. And so I said, well, this flame, she must be from my star system. Her soul must be birthed from the same place as me, and we must share because we can speak without speaking, like to each other, like we can feel each other. And I experienced that. I experienced heart pain with her for years. I could feel the resistance in our consciousness, the amount of pain and suffering that I've endured over many, many years. It's really hard to explain. It's like your head being a basketball, and imagine pumping your head up to 100 psi of pressure, and that's what it feels like when the Holy Spirit is trying to move through your body, and your body is not capable of holding that type of vibration. So it has to create its own pathways, and in creating its own pathways, it has to move through these patterns of resistance and these pain blocks. I don't know metaphysically all of the things that were going on within my being, but I know that my DNA was opening up, and I was holding more light, and I was moving to kind of the next stage of conscious evolution. And obviously, through my third eye, and even now, I have unique creative conversations, and I can feel my crown chakra open up all the time, and I feel pressure in the back of my head, and I feel pressure in my temple, and I feel all of these vibrating stars and things going through my body on occasion, and the intensity of this energy that moves through my body, and the speed at which my creativity moves through. I learned over the years to take a lot of notes, because I have a lot of creativity moving through me. And honestly, the amount of pain and suffering that I experienced all those years, I don't wish it upon anybody. But I can tell you this, that it is through my pain and suffering that I have a greater sense for the pain and suffering that humanity is experiencing, and that humanity has just under the hood of their consciousness, in the unconscious aspects of themselves, the parts that fuel their limiting belief systems, and their fear, and their pain, and their competitiveness, and their orneriness, and their and their grasping for intellectual things and worldly things as a way to feel safe and secure. That is absolutely the things that I was making conscious in my being. To explain what God consciousness feels like, it's like when you're in your ego, you're in the driver's seat of the car, and you're shifting, and you're turning, and you're doing all those things. But when you're having a Kundalini awakening, and the higher self is moving through you, it's like being transported from the seat of the car into the engine itself. You were inside of the engine, feeling all of those pressures, feeling all of that heat, feeling all of that gasoline, feeling everything. I explain it, it's like being in slow motion on a tricycle for years on end, and pedaling in slow motion through a brick wall while you're on fire, and drowning at the same time. And that's how it felt. I remember for years, thinking, oh, okay, I'm almost grounded. I'm 80% here, and then the next 6 months or 8 months, I'm 88% grounded. I'm 92%, and then this just went on for years and years and years. I didn't start feeling like I was truly grounded probably for 6 years. 6, 7, and then I've started really feeling grounded the last 2 to 2.5 years, and that continues more and more and more. And that's a part of integrating or self-actualizing, so that you can you can move back into a human identity and utilize your intellect, but your intellect is no longer the primary way that you identify yourself. You now identify yourself fully with the God observer, and then you utilize your intellect and your identity as a vehicle, as a means for spirit to fulfill its work. Whereas most people, when they're unrealized, they are completely in an intellectual space. They have not opened the emotional, the deeper emotional space. And so there's a disconnect from that feeling consciousness, from that intuitive consciousness. So right after I left my marriage, I knew that I wanted to have kids again. And when I met my ex-wife, she had a daughter. And then after we had 2 kids, she didn't want to have kids anymore. And so being the wonderful giver that I am, I decided to get my nuts cut at 27, which is, looking back, it's pretty ridiculous. And there's a symbolism there in terms of as a man and doing that to yourself, which I didn't realize at the time because I was so good at overgiving. And so I realized, living at my sister's house for that few weeks or whatever, that I wanted to have the opportunity to have kids again with my flame, and I had time. She didn't have kids, and she didn't want to have kids for 8 or 9 years. And so I did some research and found like a specialist in Tucson, Arizona, and I inquired on how to have a reverse vasectomy. And I went down to the bank at some point in the next few months and tried to get a loan to get a reverse vasectomy because it was like 10 grand. And I got denied, and then I got a call back from the lady, and she says, "I got you approved." And I made that appointment. I think it was like December 2013. And I remember driving down. Well, before I went down to Tucson, I had emailed Summer Bacon, who is the channel for Dr. Peoples, and it was obviously at that point, I re-listened to my reading a few times, and wanted to connect with her, and she was gracious enough to meet a perfect stranger for breakfast in Sedona, and so I drove down in my little white Subaru BRZ, which was what I call my soul car, because I didn't realize, like, before my awakening, like I had really wanted this car once I learned about Subaru and Toyota was making it. And I can remember like emailing like 20 or 30 dealerships in California and saying, trying to put myself on a waiting list for this Subaru BRZ. And then I had a dream around January 2013 about this car driving in the parking lot of the bakery that I worked at. And sure enough, that same day I got the call, and they said, "Yeah, we got Fairfield Subaru. We got this white BRZ that you want." And he goes, "Man, I was going through some old emails, and I just strangely came across yours." And he goes, "We got exactly what you want." And I go, "Look, but I'm not willing to pay, the markup." And he goes, "We don't do markups here at Subaru, Fairfield Subaru." And at this time, I wasn't really getting along with my wife that much. She didn't want to support me in getting this car. So we were fighting that whole day, and she basically drove me down to Subaru and Fairfield and dropped me off. And I had to, get a loan by myself. She wasn't going to be on the cosign. This was 3 months before I met the flame. But anyway, my point is, during this time, my awakening, I came across the symbolism for Subaru, and the stars on the Subaru, on the logo, actually represent the Palladian star system. So I think it was very unique that I was driving a car that's logo represents the Palladian star system, which is my home star system. And so I was driving down to Tucson, and it's a very unique journey. You know, I didn't really get a hotel. I was trying to save money and everything like that, and I just pull off on the side of the road and sleep. And then once I got into Sedona, since I had pretty much kind of stayed up all night and stayed in my car, and I wanted to be clean for my breakfast with Summer. And so I went to a hotel real quick, and I told them if I could pay like half price just to go in there and shower and things like that. And so I went in there and showered, and I pulled up at this restaurant, and Summer was there, and I got out of my car, and so we went in and sat down, and she goes, I could tell right away that you're an ET by how big your eyes are. And we had this, really unique conversation. And then after we had breakfast, we went up into the hills of Sedona, which is just right around the corner or whatever from this restaurant we were at. And we took a nice, like, half an hour, 45-minute hour hike, and had this, like, really nice conversation. And, she was telling me about her visions and different things she's experienced in her life, her conversations with Jesus that she had, the spirit of Jesus when she was younger. And she said, when Jesus' life, he was a rebel. He stood up against, the norm. And it inspired me, that conversation. And when I came back, I ended up that's where I got my inspired by my tattoos, which at this time because I was so fascinated by understanding the structures and the patterns of the physical and spiritual dimensions of reality, that when I started putting tattoos on my body, like one side would kind of represent my spiritual identity and one side would represent my physical identity. And so I got inspired to get the angel and rebel tattoos on my forearms, the right side being my spiritual identity, me being knowing that what I was experiencing was so profound that I had to be a human angel in a sense, and the left being my physical identity and being a rebel. And certainly that's represented by my learning later about my astrology with Scorpio and Uranus, and having that kind of rebellious energy. But in the sense that being a soldier of love here on Earth, and sometimes seeking a greater level of truth and freedom and love is going to seem rebellious in this world, because people are so fixed on their mass limiting belief systems and so fixed on their judgmental ways that love does come off as being rebellious. And certainly 2,000 years ago, when they were transitioning into the age of Pisces, Jesus was a profoundly rebellious being, because the things that he had to say, similar to the things that I'm speaking about in that time, the world was so much more archaic, and so you can imagine the resistance that he was up against. Whereas, me being here and moving into the age of Aquarius, I think it's the table has certainly been set for the world to be a lot more receptive to some of the deeper truths, that I speak about in my work. I went to Tucson, and I had the surgery, and what I had set up was I'd set up so that my flame would get roses delivered to her, and there was a note. And this, I think I used some of the lyrics from Bellyful, a Dave Matthews song on the album Away from the World, and just to kind of like let her know that I was 1,000 miles away, but that I was thinking about her, and that I had that I was getting a reverse vasectomy, and I wanted to have kids with her. And again, we were in a really weird space, and so it seemed like she was always kind of blocking me, but she was also always leaving an avenue for communication between us. And again, it was a really messy experience, so I won't really get into details, but I would say that but that was my intention, that maybe one day that we would have a boy and a girl. And And I remember a few months while driving back from Arizona, and it was just a really unique. I was on the hero's journey, I was a bag of ice and putting on my nuts on the drive back to California, and it's probably December 2013, and then 2014, and maybe towards January, February, I remember taking a trip to San Francisco with my family, and I just remember just this profound pain in my heart. It was like I don't know what she was going through at the time, my flame, but it was something very profound and very intense, and it felt like my heart almost exploded in my chest. Like for hours, I felt like this hole in my chest, and I've felt heart pain on and off all these years, and I know some of it is my own spiritual pain, but I know some of it is her spiritual pain as well. And I didn't know what was going on in her life, but I know that there was something unique happening at that time. And so at this point, I really couldn't even function anymore at work, and I had a lot of responsibility in my job, and there's a lot of moving parts and pieces and technicalities and managing people and managing the process, the mechanical process, which is what was most stressful for me. And so some things happened, and I got overwhelmed and didn't feel the support at the workplace, and I decided to take some time off. And while I was gone, I wrote a letter to my bakery family, and I went in within a few weeks, and I put in my resignation. And my boss, who we had been through a lot together in different roles at that place, he was nice enough to put my letter up in on a screen in the break room so everybody could read. And I moved on. And I think this was kind of the beginning of the dark night of the soul for me, and it was very, very scary and very overwhelming, very sad. I didn't have money for a while, and I crashed my BRZ on the freeway going to San Francisco one day, and I was praying. I was cashing out my 401k, and I had to give it to half of it. My divorce was just becoming final that February. Within 6 months, it was quick. I jumped on everything right when everything started, sold the house right away, and filed for divorce, and my life savings in terms of like $80,000 of retirement, which was pretty decent at that point I felt for being like 35, and I had to cut that in half and then cut that with all the fucking taxes and everything that they steal from you. And I think I had like $23,000 or $26,000, and I really couldn't work at that time. But during the time of waiting for that 401k money to come in, I didn't have anything, and I didn't have money for rent. I didn't have a car at this point. And just really in a really bad place. I remember going to the park sometimes and just sitting under a tree and just like being with myself. And I remember coming across a song called "The Promise" by Tracy Chapman, and it just reminded me of this promise I had with my flame that that one day we'd find our way back to each other, and yeah. So this period of life, I really just floated around. I didn't really want to get into maintenance anymore. I tried a bunch of things. I tried to sell cars at a local Chevrolet dealership because I always kind of wanted to do that. I love automobiles, and I was always a better salesman than anybody I had ever met. Sharper, but my energy was not in a good place, and and just being in the environment around a bunch of salespeople, just fake people, and the fact that it was like 100% commission, and I needed money. I wasn't making any money, and I wasn't in a place to make that kind of transition. So I only stayed there a month, and I was going to try like to sell insurance or something like that. I got hooked up with some kind of funky place that I would probably, if I wasn't overwhelmed by the Holy Spirit, I wouldn't even fucked with. But I was so resistant to the idea of going back to maintenance and going back to turning wrenches. I didn't enjoy it, but that was my career, kind of, sort of, and I wasn't in a place to be a manager or anything like that. That's for sure. So I worked really hard, even though I could hardly fucking concentrate. I worked hard for weeks to study for an insurance license with the state of California, and I got the license, but I didn't want to work with these shady ass fucking people, and so I finally got a hold of somebody and through a temp agency and got a job as like a shift mechanic at a really kind of horrible, really shitty recycling place for a little bit. And, but that was fucking June or July. So, I mean, you figure from February to June or July, I was living off that money, that 401k money, and, just in a horrible, horrible place, and, really fucking dark place. And, eventually I, left that job and got a job as a maintenance electrician at a different manufacturing plant, which has been really good to me, a really good place for me to kind of heal and sustain and make a decent living and pay my bills and stuff. And I still actually work there. A good group of people. And, but my point is, I had a buddy from the bakery who I'm still connected with, a really sweet guy, and he went down with me when I took my insurance testing, and he was also a guy that I kind of stopped talking to me later on. It's probably one of the things that I have the most shame about, which I didn't really want to share, but I think it's necessary. I mean, he had we'd kind of go out sometimes, go out to the Wingstop and watch UFC fights and things like that. And he had a Facebook, and he had actually met my flame at work, and they had went out for like drinks before, and they were Facebook friends. And I told him like one night, that my Facebook or my phone wasn't working, my app wasn't working. Could I check out his Facebook? And I was able to get onto my flame's Facebook account through his, and I was just so overwhelmed by her life, seeing her personal life that she had blocked me from seeing, and her beauty and her simplicity and her just because I loved her so much, I loved her spirit so much, and then obviously I messaged her, told her that I was able to see her life, and I think she unfriended him, and it was probably 6 or 8 months later or whatever that I told him what I had done, because I was shameful about it, and I've always been a very virtuous person and always been very honest and never done shady shit to people or anything like that, but I was in a very like vulnerable place, and the magnetism and the connection and the pain, and it was just lifetimes and lifetimes and lifetimes of just pain and attachment, and so I admitted that to him, and I think you want to talk to me, which is fine. It's part of the journey and part of life and everything like that. But just to speak about that journey of healing, it's just so unique and profound when you bring up those deep soul level wounds, and it's really hard to explain. I mean, generally speaking, as people, we attach to our intellect, and we attach to our relationships, and we attach to physical objects for a sense of safety. And when you're overwhelmed by the Holy Spirit, there is no more vulnerable a place to be when you don't have a physical identity to attach to anymore. And so everything is like magnified. Everything is like, it's like attachment. It's like pain. It's like fear. It's like all of that on steroids. Like I said, when you're in that space, you're inside the engine of God, versus being in the seat. And so, that's why I behaved that way. And that's why I think it's important for me to, share that portion of my journey. But he also, I had been in contact with my flame through other strange means, but I have a phone number shared and talked kind of in strange ways. And so looking back on that time, if I rewinded to right after my awakening and the separation and leaving my ex-wife and then her being in contact with my flame, I had bought this little flip phone, and I wanted to be able to have a conversation with my flame, but I didn't want my work phone to have her number on it because I was so scared of what I was doing and so much in judgment of what I was doing in terms of I thought it was wrong, even though it's not wrong. And so I got this cell phone, this prepaid cell phone, and I had messaged my flame the number, and she was the only one who had that number. And probably around October of 2013, it was just a few months in, I took a trip to Austin, Texas with my buddy Steve. We were having some work training done, and it was the first time she called me on that phone. And just told her that I loved her and all that kind of stuff. And then one night when I was back at home, she called me, and we were able to just sit with each other. And even though she wouldn't say anything, she would just listen. And she was the only one that had this number, so I know when I got a call, it was from her. And for many years, she's also sent me messages in very unique ways, and I'm sure people who are going to listen to this podcast are going to judge, and that's fine. I mean, but the goal is not judgment. The goal is to provide a story that will help people move deeper into their heart and to love is understanding, and recognizing that that ultimately, healing the soul is what we're here to do. We're not here to be perfect people, and we're not here to guard our hearts, and we're not here to label everything toxic, because sometimes, fighting for love and moving through the dirt and being willing to get your hands in the dirt of life and love is how you ultimately heal. It's how you ultimately gain discernment. By experiencing things that you don't want to experience, you learn what things you do want to experience. And so part of that evolutionary process is about learning how to be more patient with ourselves, learning how to be more kind with ourselves, learning how to not judge ourselves, And that's really what developing a relationship with God's love is all about, in my opinion. So here's an excerpt from part of that conversation where I remember talking to her for hours and literally looking down at my phone and seeing that, the time that was elapsing on the phone call was a relatively short period of time versus the actual time that we were talking.
Let's see where we're at. It looks like 49 minutes. It's like time stop. My phone says 6:37 p.m. on it, and the time hasn't even moved. That is weird. But it says we're only been on the phone for 50 minutes. Is it 50 minutes, or am I just not perceiving time correctly? Because it seems like it's been longer than 50 minutes. It's like time slowing down or something. It's kind of weird. I don't know. Anyway. Yeah, that does seem like a lot longer than 50 minutes. But whatever. I'm down. That's pretty cool. So what's up? beautiful silent woman. My broken arrow song. So who's going to be a blast at the finish line? My love. When I said, what I say, hello stranger, you like jumped. Did you get freaked out or what? Yesterday? I startled you? You are, man. You're like a stranger and not a stranger. You know? It's because I want to know everything about you. But you just you draw every last little morsel out of me, out of my soul, and you know what? It's fine because my soul's endless with love, so you can just suck and suck all you want. It's never gonna end. How much I love you. There's no end in my tank. It'll go forever. You're not gonna piss me off. You inspire me. You inspire me to love you more and more and more each day. I don't care. I am who I am. This is who I am. I feel you right now.
You know, so that was around the time that I woke up from the dream, and I heard in my head, you know, there will come a time that you and David will have to spend some time apart to develop your individuate. And obviously I didn't know what that meant, and I shared this on another, I think my pilot episode, you know, that I realized that David represented the shield of God, you know, divine masculine and feminine energy. If you look at the symbolism for the Star of David is the feminine downward arrow and the masculine upward arrow in unity, in union, and even if you look at that downward arrow, it looks like a vagina. It looks like that area where a vagina is, and the upward arrow looks like an erect penis and testes, right? The upward arrow, and so if you look at, you know, a lot of the symbolism and you realize that, you know, God and the universe utilizes these patterns, these symbolisms to create physical reality, and you realize that, you know, going into a woman, having intercourse is moving into her darkness, and the masculine energy, you know, seeks to move into itself, and the feminine energy, obviously, you know, seeks physical security. You know, she has the feminine energy. In many ways, her field of awareness is expanded in proportion to a man. The feminine energy, the woman, is the closest thing to a physical representation of God on this planet as we have. She is that energy that taps into that Holy Spirit, that creativeness, that chaos, and brings life into the world. The world, the physical reality, is an expression of masculine energy. The man, the feminine energy, she is an expression of the non-physical universe. She is that inward space that is how we connect to our deepest spiritual truths as non-physical souls that come here to experience physical reality and to evolve our souls. And so, in a lot of ways, my journey has been about moving fully into my feminine space. And in order to do that, I've been alone the last 9 years, learning how to not depend on the feminine energy as a part of my sense of security. I've had to learn how to become self-sustained. For my flame, she has been in a relationship, and for her, part of her own process of growth, I imagine, has been learning how to feel safe in the world, because for a woman, in many respects, and of course this is a generalization, but she feels whole in herself naturally. She feels connected to that emotional reality. And for her, that masculine presence is what gives her a sense of physical safety in the world, because she already feels emotionally safe. And for a man, he generally feels much more emotional or physically safe, but he often depends on the woman in his life, or the feminine energy around him, to feel for him. He's dependent upon that. And that's kind of a foundational element of relationship, in the unevolved relationship, in the wounded relationship, in the relationship where we are dependent upon each other for the certain aspects of ourselves that we haven't actualized. Now, in absolute reality, we don't become androgynous per se. We all have individual roles to play on this planet and embodiments. I mean, obviously, some people are here to play out those themes of, being a man, being in a man's body, but having feelings as primarily being a feminine identity, or being in a woman's body, but feeling that masculine identity as a deeper self. And so there's all kinds of different variables that are playing out, especially in this new age, where there's an opening of acceptability, allowability, or forceability, or righteousness in many ways, that people are wanting to experience that freedom of self-identification, which is a beautiful thing. But in the traditional sense, when I speak of a man and a woman and moving towards more evolved relationships on this planet, that is what I have been working towards in this life, is to self-actualize and to be self-sustained. And I can remember in the beginning of my awakening, getting this this radioactive tattoo in the center of it, being yin and yang symbolism. And so I realized that my DNA was transforming, my consciousness was transforming, and in this wild radioactive state per se, which was kind of inspired by the Imagine Dragons song, that I was moving towards this unity of masculine and feminine energy within my own self. And certainly being alone the last, 8.5 years, I've deeply longed to be in relationship, but for whatever reason, my own growth, God had other plans for me to move into my own creativity, to move into my own self-actualization, to again become self-sustained. And as my flame, had moved on, I think I cut off some of this podcast because there's a realization that I probably don't need to continue, but there were realizations that she moved into a relationship, and I became aware of that, and probably 3 or 4 times during that period, where over the years that I became aware that she was in relationship, and I was so completely devastated. And couldn't eat and couldn't function, and I had to go through so many stages of despair. I think they call it 5 stages of despair. No, I don't think that's it. Grief, 5 stages of grief. Yeah, I went through a lot of stages of grief, and I've said some things over the years that weren't very nice to her because of that pain and that hurt. But deep down, I've always held her in the highest regard because I value her spirit, and I know who she is, and I know that inevitably just that as I had the free will to walk away from my marriage, she had the free will to move on and experience a relationship with somebody other than me. I obviously had a lot of judgment, come towards me in terms of from many people, and the reality was that my ex-wife, moved into a relationship a few months or however it was after that, and after we broke up, and was married the next year, and and in fact she got back with her first boyfriend, who they had a kid with, that I raised for 16 years. And the beautiful thing about that whole storyline is that they have been able to, work out their own karma over the last 8 years or so. And he's been helping to raise my 2 children from that age of, 9 and 10 up into adulthood. And my kids are now 18 and 19. And so, in a lot of ways, things came full circle, and people had the time and the perspective to see that, the decision that I made was what I had to make for my own spirit. All those years I needed to be alone to, sit there on the carpet and be zoned out in my headphones and just listening to music and realizing that all this profound agony and pain and love and romanticism that you find in the artists and the musicians are writing about and singing about is the same type of love that I was experiencing, the same type of connection and transformation that I was going through. And just being lost in that pain and that hurt, and being overwhelmed by love, and bringing my unconscious to the conscious surface. And that was the journey of my awakening. That was the healing that I'd spent, many years going through. So I think it's pretty fitting that I'm recording this podcast here, on this full moon in Libra, and it will be released here on April 16th on Easter Day, which is a festival that celebrates the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And I think it is very fitting that, in many ways, for me, this is my own rebirth from this process, from this awakening, from this healing that's 9 years in the making. And the number 9 is a divine number, representing humanity in a lot of ways, and ultimately, my work has been about transforming from living a life guided by unconscious fear to living a life guided by conscious love. And I think that is really the transformation in a lot of ways for many of us on this planet. And that process is a process that requires us to become more simple as people. It requires us to look through our limiting belief systems and to move through a lot of our limiting stories, and it opens us to what I call this universal compassion, this ability to live our lives and become, more emotionally rich as a result. And, it's not like this perfected state. I'm dealing with, health things recently with my heart and a lot of things going on with my kids and different things. And, and even in my workplace, and wanting to, create this life that I want to experience as a humanitarian, as a speaker, as a podcaster, as a clothing designer, and writing these 3 books that I know I have to write, that I'm here to write. But I deal with fear, and I deal with insecurity, and I deal with, not feeling fully empowered, and I deal with not feeling fully abundant or trying to step into my power. And so, I don't come to you as this like perfected being. I don't come to you as this like fully enlightened being, or, this all-knowing being. I'm just an expression of God's love. I'm just a mystic who's, here to share my truth with you so that you might, have, that you might be able to be triggered to want to move deeper into your own truths that are unique and individual to you. So, I certainly don't have this solution, and the ego always wants to say, I'm finally here, or this is finally going to make me happy. But, the truth is, like, the more self-aware you become and the more you feel, the more complex the game becomes in a lot of ways. So it doesn't necessarily get any easier. I mean, sure it does, but not always. And in some ways, but it's more beautiful, it's more rich, it's more fulfilling, it's more juicy, and I hope that you have enjoyed EP5, The Diary of a Human Angel. Certainly, when I do write my autobiography, which I still do plan on writing in very unique and profound ways, the ways that I was given years ago or inspired through to become aware that was how I kind of wanted to do it. Hopefully I can, and I will. So, I hope you enjoyed this very personal, this very, vulnerable, this very unique episode. And I think the next one we're going to work on is called EP6, State of the Union. And we're just going to dive a little deeper into personal development and the tools around that. And in closing, I'm going to go ahead and offer you another excerpt from my reading from Dr. Peoples, which is in line with speaking more deeply into my work here and into my identity and into walking the shoes of Christ. And it seems very, very fitting that I didn't finish this episode on April 3rd, but that it's going to be released here on Easter. So I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode. Until next time, stay thirsty for life. I love you. Bye.
Yeah. So what would be the greatest way that I could experience this unlimitedness that I pray about every day?
Yeah, just enjoy it, my dear friend. You see, you can't put it in a bottle. And you can't give it a name. Ultimately, part of the plan as you grow into greater and greater love is as you are on a quest for love, suddenly you become that, and no longer are you seeking it, but you're just the full expression of it. And that's the best way we can describe the journey. So don't try to become anything in particular, and don't try to do it in a particular fashion. We could share all kinds of things that would be of interest to you. You are an old Masonic. You had the opportunity to work with the Freemasons, and you enjoyed the cryptograms that were created then, and the unusual studies of alchemy and the such relationships with the world, because you truly believe in such things as being possible. And so you could go into a Masonic Masonic Lodge and enjoy that experience. But once again, we're going to say it, and we're going to say it again and again to you, Michael. You don't want to be limited. That's the bottom line. And this lifetime is your lifetime of freedom, where you are really putting yourself out there as the counterpoint for other people to explore themselves. So this is why you keep pushing yourself out into the mainstream, knowing that you're different. But part of the plan here is that eventually you're going to start to talk. Eventually you're going to start to share. And in this respect, you're going to let yourself be seen and be heard and be out in the world again, so that you can finally see the master that you are. Because you always think everybody else is the master, but you, Michael, are. You don't want to be anything less than that. You want to walk the shoes of Christ if you can. Christ was not limited.
This is true.
Christ was with God at all times. And the healing that he did had nothing to do with studies. It had to do with belief, absolute faith and trust, and knowing eventually that really everything is in right order and anything is possible. And you believe that. Since you were a child, you believed you could fly.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. I fly all the time in my dreams, and
yes,
it's
you do.
Amazing.
Yeah.